When he produced these photographs, Versailles could not publish them. They were considered to be too risque, too seedy, too inappropriate. And so he published a book called Paris by Night. And it's, if anyone has ever seen a photograph by Versailles, it is those photographs. And they were beautiful pictures of the Seine by night with lights glittering on the river, or pictures of the Eiffel Tower lit up, gorgeous cityscapes. So that was Paris by Night. But he kept this other volume of photographs, and finally at the end of his life, in the 1970s, he published it. And he published it calling it Secret Paris by Night. Secret Paris by Night. And in that book, there are 3 or 4 of these pictures of the monocle. But in the 1970s, he felt that he had to explain the photographs to what he presumed would be a homophobic public. And he felt that he had to explain that he in no way approved of these images. He just took what he saw and he offers it. And in fact, he even writes a very moralistic narrative to accompany the pictures. And this is what he says. So, in this little section on the lesbian bar, he says, all the women were dressed as men. And they were so totally masculine in appearance that at first glance, one thought that they were men. Obsessed by their unattainable goal to be men, they wore the most somber uniforms, black tuxedos, as though in mourning for their ideal masculinity. Okay? And that's a lot to take in, I know, but there are a couple of things that are wrong with this caption. If you go back and look at the images, are all the women dressed as men? Clearly not. So he really only thinks of this space as a problem because some women are dressed as men, and if some women are dressed as men, then the whole club, by implication, is mannish, right? So what he's missing in his recollection is that what's disturbing about the image is not that all the women are dressed as men, but that some are very attractive feminine women who accompany the women dressed as men. And this might be even more of a problem for contemporary viewers than to see these rather stereotypical images of women, quote-unquote, dressed as men. The other problem with this quotation is that he says that he interprets how these butchers, how these masculine women feel. And he says that they were obsessed by an unattainable goal to be men, and so they wear these black tuxedos as if they're at a funeral, as if they're in mourning for their ideal masculinity, for masculinity they can never have. Again, these don't look like women in mourning to me. And the black tuxedos, sometimes this is not a tuxedo here, maybe there's a tuxedo there, and then if we move on, no, not so many tuxedos, okay? So the caption really, really misremembers and tells the story very differently from the way that the photograph does. If you take away the caption and the narratives, what you see is a fantastic club where people actually look pretty happy. Now, there is darkness in the club, in the images. The images are very, very dark, but the darkness is about nightlife, nightclub, night worlds, not about this heavy, sad, melancholic vision of, oh my God, I can never be a man, I am doomed. Okay, so in fact, if you see, one couple are sort of kissing, and this person here is Versailles, just coming into the frame a little bit on the right-hand side. So again, he's not as invisible as he thinks, and he's in the middle of what looks like a really fun club, the likes of which you will no longer find in Paris. So what's fascinating about these images from so long ago, from now 80 years ago, is that they represent the past, not as this time of sad, repressed, lonely people, but as a time when people are actually probably having a much better time out at night than they might be nowadays. If you go out to a club in Paris, it's very hard to find a lesbian bar, and when you do, a few drunks sitting around or something. Or it's really not that lesbian. There are a lot of people, different people there, which is great, but it's not this, okay? So Contrary to what we expect to find when we look into the past, we expect that things will be worse in the past because that confirms for us that things are better now and that we are on the path to liberation and that we are always at the apex of civilization. Contrary to that model, we go back in time and we find that things were often better. Not necessarily so, but certainly in these images. This picture, the last one, a really beautiful picture. This person wearing a tuxedo, but doesn't look to be in mourning, actually is looking off into the distance in quite a sort of noble, heroic, proud way. There is no shame in this picture. There is no sense of like, oh, I don't want you to take my picture, and so on. But the caption is very damaging. Young, female, invert. Okay, rather than, if this had been a picture of a heterosexual person, maybe you would have said club goer at night, or Parisian, in the nightclub. Young, female, invert. This is a kind of caption you would usually have under a medical photograph, not under a wistful, aestheticized image such as this one. So that's 1932. And this then, a similar kind of picture. What I like about these final pictures is that the early pictures are a butch lesbian with a femme lesbian. These later pictures are sort of studies, portraits, and there's no need to sort of show the butch with the femme. These are standalone images. This butch, notice, is not in mourning at all. He's drinking some nice champagne from a bucket and again, seems to be celebrating something that maybe nowadays escapes us completely, okay? And I'm just going to move through these quickly in the interest of time, but at the same time that Brassai was taking these photographs, a gay photographer called Cecil Beaton, who's very famous and began the trend of fashion photography that lives on today in all kinds of people's work, like Annie Leibovitz or whoever. Fashion photography really began with Cecil Beaton, and he made images of all the famous people of the day, but when it came to Gertrude Stein, he did this funny thing. Instead of making her look glamorous, he actually portrays her as quite dowdy, but he also doubles her image, which I think is very interesting, to have Gertrude Stein split into two Gertrude Steins. If anyone knows about Gertrude Stein's writing, she used repetition a lot in her work, so this is quite appropriate. But there's also a masculine Gertrude Stein, and then in the background a more feminine. And what I think is interesting here is the attempt to capture gender ambiguity by splitting the image into two. And there's something very clever about that. And also refusing to just glamorize Gertrude Stein and turn her into a lesbian who is recognizable as, like, today, somebody from the L Word or something. She's resolute in a certain grimness, which I think is quite effective. Here she's doubled again, but here her feminine persona has come forward, and in the background is Alice B. Toklas. So by their positions, now Gertrude Stein, her feminine self has come forward and is in the masculine position again, and in the background is the more feminine partner, Alice B. Toklas. So Beaton is really playing around with the relationship between bodies and with gender ambiguity within one body.